Hello, I am Kaitlyn Barrera, and today I am going to be discussing the myth of Diana and Actaeon and the connection between our legal system. The myth of Diana and Actaeon challenges us to consider how our own legal system determines the justification of punishments. This tale opens the door to further discussions and questions like, are there instances where the punishment does not fit the crime? Is our legal system silencing or dismissing the voices of those imprisoned? And how do we determine which punishments are just or unjust? So, for introduction, this is Diana, also known as Artemis. She is the daughter of Zeus and Leto, twin of Apollo, goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, fertility, and virginity. She was primarily a virgin huntress who ensured all hunts were fruitful. Diana was responsible for protecting the young as the older generations were hunted. It was her job to make sure that they were protected and able to repopulate eventually. As the goddess of virginity and the representation of purity, she took pride in remaining chaste, and anyone who threatened her purity, their fate would meet a very violent end. Which leads us to Actaeon. Actaeon was a very proudful hunter, and the myth centers his demise after a very successful hunting trip and his accidental encounter with Diana. In literature, Ovid even points out and describes the forest after Actaeon's successful hunt. The forest floors were literally dripping with blood. And this can be argued that Actaeon overhunted. He decimated so much of the animal population that it became empty. And the story centers his unfortunate fate and his accidental encounter. As we recall, Diana takes pride and virtue in her innocence and purity, so when Actaeon accidentally stumbles upon her bathing, she feels threatened and transforms him into the very thing he so pridefully decimates, which is a stag. Ironically, his own hounds end up hunting him down and end up killing him. The myth of Diana and Actaeon is very well connected to our legal system. After hearing about the myth, we are able to question, how can we determine whether a punishment is just or unjust? Was Diana's punishment towards Actaeon just or unjust? Should we be able to sentence a criminal to death? And what if a punishment does not fit the crime? As we have learned, Actaeon's punishment was because he was threatening and spying on Diana bathing, not because necessarily that he decimated the entire forest. But ironically, his punishment ended up relating to his successful hunt and what he ended up demising. So let's make the connection to our legal system. In the U.S., sentencing laws vary due to jurisdiction. Our legal system is based on federal law, which are drafted from even other grand sets of laws, and they are enacted by state legislatures and local laws passed by counties and cities. Our criminal justice system consists of three main parts. The first one would be law enforcement, which consists of police, sheriffs, marshals. The second part would be the court system, which includes judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and any of the staff that is present during a defendant's sentencing. And the third main part would be the correction system. The correction system incorporates all forms of sentencing and punishment. It includes incarceration and probation. After a defendant is convicted or pleads guilty, a judge will decide on the appropriate punishment. Now, there definitely has to be factors on deciding sentencing. It depends on the gravity of the situation and the crime committed. Crimes involving homicide or being of age and harming others or property will definitely be considered a major offense. Other factors would be like the individual characteristics of a defendant. Are they most likely to be repeat offenders? Have they been convicted of the same felon before? The nature of punishment, the sentences for other crimes where the offense has occurred, and how states punish the crime where the defendant was convicted. Sentencing usually takes place immediately after convictions for minor infractions and misdemeanors, or when a defendant is clearly guilty. However, this is not always the case, and I will further explain why sometimes convictions may seem unjust. According to ideas.ted.com, in the United States, nearly 70% of people held in local jails are there for one reason, and that is simply because they cannot pay for bail. If you can't afford bail, you stay in jail. And even though in some cases the crimes they are charged with are often non-violent, for instance, like disorderly conduct or probation violations, when a defendant can't come up with bail money, they are forced to stay in jail until a set court date or until the bail is paid. We are able to see this narrative play out in the myth of Diana and Actaeon. Actaeon was definitely punished, but wasn't punished necessarily for his decimation of the animal population, but more so for intruding Diana's space and becoming a threat to her. We see this, and we go back to, I would further like to go back to the question of the beginning of the presentation on how do we determine which punishments are just or unjust, and is our legal system silencing or dismissing the voices of those imprisoned? Well, we see this in real life scenarios. If defendants are not able to pay bail, they are forced to stay in jail until a court date or until they are able to pay bail. They are not able to be in a court setting to see a judge or eventually determine what their future possibilities are. We also see this narrative with Actaeon. Before he is even able to explain his accidental encounter with Diana, Diana turns him into a stag, and he is unable to plead his side of the story. So, yes, we are definite. Whether you agree with Diana, Diana's punishment is just or unjust, you can't deny that she acts as the court, the jury, and to the extreme, an executioner. And Actaeon is definitely the guilty defendant. Whether you consider her actions just or unjust, Diana has in essence silenced the voice of any dissent and transformed Actaeon into an animal. The myth of Diana and Actaeon then challenge us to consider how our own legal system picks up where this myth ends off. Thank you very much.